Now, the topic for the night, of course, is LSAT reading comp. I have one LSAT reading comprehension focused question from one student, Brittany, that I'll use it as a jumping off point here. She was asking, and I'll quote here, for LSAT reading comp, I'd mainly like to know how you think we should be approaching these passages. I've heard to read the passage completely first, and I've also heard to skim the passage. What is the most effective way to keep the questions missed to a minimum? So should you read the whole passage first, and or should you skim the passage? What's most effective? Well, I certainly recommend reading the passage first. I wouldn't suggest jumping to the questions and then coming back, because the questions, a lot of them are general in nature, and most of them are not referencing specific lines anyway. So reading the questions won't necessarily give you a particular thing to look for at the start. You're pretty much always looking for the same thing anyway. You're looking for the main idea, the primary purpose, and the author's opinion or the author's viewpoint, if any. So you're always looking for the same things at the start. And then the more detail-oriented questions, or the questions related to what the author would most likely agree with, you can always go back and find those specific things when you need them. Now, I'll get into tons about technique and strategy as we go forward, but I did want to address that directly at first. As for the question of skimming, skimming is a tricky word because people mean different things when they use the word skim. When I think of skim, I think of a surface level read that avoids the details and maybe doesn't really fully comprehend it anyway, but is really walking away more with just the general topic. So I think you want more than the general topic, but you'd also don't want so little that you're not getting a firm grasp of the main idea. So I think you do want to read the passage, but you want to slow down when they're covering things that are more general in nature, and then you want to speed up when you're getting into things that are more specific and detail-oriented in nature, because the details, you're not really going to walk away with them no matter what. These passages are meant to be on topics that you're not familiar with at the outset. They're meant to be passages that are on topics that are boring in nature, and so the details really could run the risk of getting you bogged down, and I don't want that. So I say slow down for whenever they're presenting a viewpoint or an opinion or a main idea, and then speed up when they're including details, supporting examples, and evidence, things of that nature. Now, the follow-up question to this was, how do you recommend focusing on staying engaged, especially on your least favorite topics? So this is another thing I've thought quite a bit about. I think for staying engaged, you want to caricature or exaggerate the different viewpoints presented in the passage so that it becomes more interesting for you. So I actually have an article on my site where I go through this with a particular example. I'll share it with you here so you can see what I'm talking about. But basically, the article goes into more depth than I think is worth doing right now. So it's LSAT reading comprehension passages, easy as Harry Potter. I'll include the link for you in the chat in just a bit so you can see. But basically, I'm saying that what I want to do is I want to divide the viewpoints presented into two major categories, viewpoint 1, viewpoint 2. So you see I have this little minimal marking system. Viewpoint 1 is V1, viewpoint 2 is V2. The evidence associated with viewpoint 1 is E1. Evidence associated with viewpoint 2 is E2. Then you have the advocates of each side as A1 and A2. So I said for Harry Potter, we have forces of good versus forces of evil. We have Harry Potter versus Voldemort, and so on and so on. Obviously, it gets more boring with actual LSAT passages, but this is a general idea. Now, if you want to see about actual LSAT passages, I do have something for that as well. So this is my categorization of LSAT reading comprehension passages over the years. I group them into several different categories, a couple dozen really. And you see that for like computers, internet, copyright law, it appeared many, many times over the years. Test 25, 36, 39, 41, 42, 51. Juno 7, we'll actually get into this one in a little bit with the web, links, copyright law, and intellectual property. But basically, if it's getting boring for you and whatever your topic of choice is, I think one in particular I really like is when they get into objectivism and subjectivism. Yeah, right here. So this topic in particular, it's two different sides. And it's come up a handful of times, probably even more than this, depending on how you define it. But the idea is that if this is something unfamiliar to you, we divide them into two camps that are essentially at odds with each other. So it could be Latin American lit versus Spanish lit. It could be objectivism versus subjectivism, and so on. You want to say objectivism could be the ultra rational scientific approach, and subjectivism could be the critical theory, new historians, alternate legal narratives, and so on. So you exaggerate the two different sides to get a better handle on what each is saying and to allow you to more easily hold each side in your head. So practice the topics that you don't like, read about them in the actual LSAT passages, read about them in your casual or leisure reading, whatever it may be. Obviously, there are hundreds and hundreds of LSAT passages, so there's never a need to go outside the passages for more specific practice.